Hi, everyone, and welcome to Lurking for Legends, a live video cast where we talk with people from all walks of the publishing industry. I'm Christy Stratus, historical suspense and historical fantasy author, and my awesome co-hosts are epic fantasy author Richard H. Stevens and science fiction author David M. Kelly. So Lurking for Legends is an interactive broadcast, and we encourage viewers to chime in with any questions you may have for our guest when she comes on, or comment on what you hear in the show. So we are back from our Christmas break. Happy New Year, everyone. We're really happy to be here.
Happy New Year.
Big Happy New Year. So what is up with everyone? We've had 2 weeks to do things. It had better be impressive. No, I'm just kidding. We all relax. What did you guys do? What has been going on in your worlds?
Well, Dave, you got some exciting news that's not really on a writing front, although this might become your writing buddy.
Yeah, well, we kind of acquired a dog over Christmas. Well, just before New Year. As a
kind of
border collie. I forgot now what it is. Pyrenean Mountain Dog Cross. Yes.
Just dog for short.
Yeah, just dog. He's called Bingo, and we so far he's getting under the feet a lot, basically.
I think that's her job, yeah.
Yeah, that's a dog. Yeah, that's a dog's life.
Yeah.
Other than that, writing-wise, I've been, my first reader, thank you, has returned my manuscript to me with thumbs up and lots of red ink.
Well, that's actually a good thing, though, right?
Yeah. That is a good thing.
They're finding stuff that you're going to correct, so that's good.
Yes, exactly. So I'm now starting to work through that again for my third pass. And I'm also continuing writing other things as well. But still pushing along full steam ahead. I've got a deadline to get it to my external editor in early February. And so hopefully we'll be looking for a release around March.
Awesome. So am I the only one that when I read my edit my book like the third or fourth time that it takes so long to get through it just because it's like, oh my God, I've read this over and over and over again.
Oh,
It just seems so boring now. And, it's not boring, but it's just, because you're just going through line by line trying to find stuff.
No, by the time I get to the end of everything, it's like I literally don't want to see the book ever again.
Exactly. That's okay. I'm not the only one.
It's like, no, I've seen this enough now. Yeah.
What about you, Christy? What's new with you?
Well, I crossed 300 likes on Corrupted Magic on Kindle Vella, nice. Which is really exciting. That was faster than expected, so very cool. Episode 24 just published, and that one is called Ripple Effect. And I can't tell you too much about it because I don't want to give you any spoilers. But, I kind of sound like a broken record, but it's a very exciting episode. And, we're still in this like mini climax before the real climax comes in. So anyway, I'm currently writing episode 31. So I am still way ahead, really happy with that. I need that time sometimes, especially when I run into little tricky things. Like a lot of the time when I write my first draft, I write garbage, and it's really just to figure out what on earth is going to happen. I'm trying to see what everyone has to say, and then I clean it up. So, I've been going through one of those for a few days now. And I think I'm almost at the end of episode 31. So then I'll be able to clean it up and make it all nice. So I think that's mostly what I've been doing in terms of writing. How about you?
And you do have an end goal, Christy?
An angle?
Yeah, you know where you're going to end.
Yeah. So I have, which doesn't always happen, but I do have an idea of where I'm going with it. So, cool. That's farther ahead than usual when I do my novels, which is the nice thing. It's kind of like Vella has changed my process a little bit, which is actually really good. So I had an angle, at least. I just didn't know how to get there.
Awesome.
Yeah. How about you, Richard?
So I've been doing a little bit of writing over the Christmas break, not a lot. But I wanted to, first of all, start this show off before we bring in our guest, Esther. I want to thank Christy and Dave for being with me for coming up on our 100th episode on January, or actually it's February 7th is our 100th episode, but I couldn't have done it without you two. This is an idea I've had a couple of years ago, and I've had, a little bashful about going and appearing live, but it's something I've always wanted to do. And then Dave was so supportive at the beginning, and then Christy, you jumped right in there, and both of you have been amazing co-hosts. So thank you both for doing this. But I want to let everybody know, if you tune in even after the fact, that Lurking for Legends is going to be changing its format after February 7th. So we're going to be interviewing about 4 more authors after Esther. And then we're going to be appearing monthly, the second Tuesday of every month. And we're going to be doing exclusively live reads with various authors of any genre. And if you are an author and you want to appear on our live reads, contact Christy, David, or myself and let us know, and we will gladly get you in there. We generally take 2 authors plus one of us every month, and we look forward to doing them. They're a lot of fun. We have Dave's costumes are so zany, and Christy's got some awesome classical costumes, and the accents that you two come up with are certainly memorable. So again, thank you both for making Lurking for Legends memorable for me. I really appreciate all the work that you guys have done behind the scenes, and certainly on screen as well. So this to let everybody know that's what's happening with Lurking for Legends in 2023.
Yep. So the 7th, the 100th episode, we are actually doing the opening scene from The Importance of Being Earnest, which should have some nice costumes and other things.
Yeah,
so,
no, it sounds good. Looking forward to it. So we'll let everybody know a little bit more about it as the weeks go on, and as we build up to February 7th. But until then, I think we have someone waiting in the backgrounds. Yes, Esther Erman, and I'm going to bring her on screen. And Christy, let you introduce her.
Yes, we are super excited to have historical novelist Esther Erman, and she has written the book Rebecca of Salerno. So good to have you here, Esther. Yeah, it's a beautiful book. Isn't that gorgeous?
Mm-hmm.
My goodness.
Great cover.
So tell us a little bit about yourself, just to start with.
Thank you so much for inviting me, and Happy New Year to everyone. I'm a writer. I was a longtime language teacher. I currently live in the Bay Area in California, but I consider myself from New Jersey. And I was very excited to, this book is something that's been brewing for a long time because in school, I was a French major. I have my BA and MA in French, and I always loved French literature. But as a Jewish woman, I had to compartmentalize because any Jewish characters that showed up in the classic French literature were villains. Not that there were many of them, but they were all bad. And when I did my doctorate in language education, I did a survey of Jewish characters in literature, which is when I discovered Walter Scott's Ivanhoe from 1820. And he created the character of Rebecca, which in itself is a fascinating genesis. But she was the first positive Jewish character in certainly major European literature. And she does set a high bar for Jewish women, I have to say that. She's beautiful, brilliant, she's brave, and she's a good daughter. But she came as a breath of fresh air for me after all the negative characters. And I wanted to give her own story, which being in Ivanhoe, Rebecca was a healer. And I decided this was a key to her character. So when I discovered that there was a medical school in Salerno, in the Kingdom of Sicily, where men, women, Jews, Christians, and Muslims could study together, I said, aha, that is what Rebecca is going to want to do after she flees England and doesn't get over Ivanhoe.
That's fantastic.
And
Already,
that medical school was real.
Oh, yeah.
Quite amazing. Also, I've just discovered it was actually the first medical school in Europe and possibly in the world.
Wow. That's amazing. Oh my
and
goodness.
this is, well, Ivanhoe was medieval, and of course my book continues in the medieval era.
Yeah. Was that research rather difficult? I mean, I know that you had Ivanhoe for like a starting point, but then you're doing research so far into the past. Um, how did you find the research?
It's actually fascinating, and part of it is that you don't really get a solid response to how did this medical school start. There are some legends about it. Evidently started around the year 802. And so the story of the founding sounds almost like a joke. It's a Greek, a Latin, a Jew, and a Muslim all get together. And it sounds like, yeah, they're going to go into the bar and have a good time. But evidently one of them was injured, and then the others kind of joined in and started a medical school, which may or may not have been connected to a monastery. But this is legend, and that's about as clear as the foundation of this school gets to be. So it's been interesting, fascinating, and there are so many aspects to life that you can spend time on and decide, what you're interested in. So food for me is an interest, and so I spent a lot of time looking at that. And just the history of the era, because so many things were coming together, really made it fascinating to look at.
I second food. Yes.
We always have this image of them just having terrible food, but in fact, in the Kingdom of Sicily at the time, they probably had fresher, better food than some of us get to enjoy these days.
That's all right.
Yeah, for sure. I just want to ask you before we get more into Rebecca, is I saw on your website that you also have written a story for a fundraiser for Ukraine called "The Art in the Time of Unbearable Crisis."
Yeah.
I just wanted to touch a little bit on that before we get back into Rebecca, because I think that's a worthwhile thing to speak about, and certainly something very current.
Yeah, that's my publisher, She Writes Press, put together the anthology, and they did pretty quickly to raise money for Ukraine. And at the time they thought, oh well, might be just a short event, and maybe by the time the book comes out, it won't even be relevant. And unfortunately, we know the war itself is ongoing. I came from a refugee family myself, and I can vouch for the fact that all those refugees have a long time, that even after the war ends, there's going to be a long healing process and a long need for support for the people. So I wrote a personal story about my maternal grandmother, who, and in the story, she was living in Poland as a very religious Jewish woman back in the days when people had arranged marriages. So she, as a young woman, fell in love with someone, and his family asked for a dowry. Her father said, if I have to pay a dowry, you're going to marry a scholar. That was more prestigious. And long story short, they got married. They had 2 children together. He went to Jerusalem. He came back to Poland and said, yeah, let's all leave. She basically said no, and ended up, through a series of things, marrying her first choice as her second husband. Okay, which sounds like a very romantic love story. My mother was born from the second marriage of both of her parents. Unfortunately, my grandmother ended up in a gas chamber, and it's kind of the result of a decision made from love. And one would wish for better results when people are making those difficult decisions, which takes me right back to Ukraine, where people are having to make those really, really difficult decisions. So anyway, that's the genesis of that. And I wish this need didn't exist today, but
Yeah, for sure.
these stories keep cycling.
No, that's awesome that you shared that information, because sometimes those personal stories can be very painful and hard to share. But so how's the fundraiser going? Is it how's the book making out?
That I really don't know. We don't have too much, not privy too much to that. So I'd have to ask my
Right.
publisher. I hope they're making a lot. And
Yes, that's for sure.
yeah. And well, I hope in the new year the war ends and at least we can get to a different phase of.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So this was one of the reasons I also identified with Rebecca, because as David might remember, at the end of Ivanhoe, she was almost burned at the stake as a healer, and also because the wrong man fell in love with her. And Ivanhoe came and rescued her. There was a duel, and she was saved. But at that point, her father and she decided it's a good time to leave England.
Yeah.
When they went south as refugees, and then of course she discovers Salerno in my sequel.
So just going back to that, Esther, do we know anything about kind of like Walter Scott's original kind of inspiration for creating Rebecca? Because she, as you say, she is a very, very unusual character for the time that book was written.
This is actually fascinating, and it's yet another history. So there was a woman in America named Rebecca Gratz. And if you live in the Philadelphia area, you might be familiar with Gratz College and the family that was pretty prominent there. So they were members. She was born right after the Revolution in America and lived till about the Civil War. She was from a very prosperous, cultured, educated family that lived in the Philadelphia area. And she actually was pretty faithful to her Jewish religion. She came from a large family where about half of the people intermarried. And she evidently had a relationship with a Christian man whom she decided not to marry. So she stayed single. And she was very philanthropic and generous. So she became involved with helping to take care of a woman who had an illness, and the woman died. This woman's fiancé was Washington Irving, the writer. And Washington Irving was just so taken with Rebecca Gratz, even though he was brokenhearted over losing his fiancée. He went to Europe, and evidently he hung out with Walter Scott. So there is a very strong temptation to say, oh, Rebecca Gratz was the source of Walter Scott's Rebecca. But this has never been definitively proven. And evidently, Rebecca Gratz read Ivanhoe and loved it. And people said, oh, were you the model for Rebecca? And she coyly did not respond. So I think if someone was able to actually prove this connection, that would be a real coup.
That would be really something. Wow.
Yeah. But other than that, it's really hard to imagine where did Rebecca come from? How did he come up with this marvelous character?
Well, I think the way social media is going now, if we say it enough, that's proof enough. Like facts start falling through the cracks, and everyone will start believing it. So we just have to keep saying it through social media, and all of a sudden, that'll be the next move.
It sounds great, but just missing that link.
I also, on your website, I said you do a lot of appearances too with this one book, and that's amazing. You had a lot of appearances last year, and the one that intrigued me the most was the one back in August called Books and Bagels. Like, how could you not have a better event than Books and Bagels? As long as you don't get grease on your book pages, but.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned that. That was my launch, and that was a lot of fun. But I'm going to segue from that to one that I hope is coming up this week. We're due for some awful weather here, which I hope doesn't happen. But there is a group in San Francisco of Italian American sportsmen, and they have a lunch where they invite speakers.
Cool.
And they are fascinated with this whole medical school at Salerno
Nice.
and want to learn about that and about the culture. And you might wonder how, in fact, I came to the attention of this group, which is that actually tomorrow, my freshman year college roommate is due to arrive here, and she is connected to the group in San Francisco. So she was going to come visit me. She said, hey, let's go have lunch there, because they have these nice lunches and they have speakers. And then I guess she told them about my book.
Wow.
So,
That's meant to be.
Is, unique.
Well, I wish you luck with that. That sounds fun. Yeah. So, in your book, Rebecca has a servant, Nina. So, what is the relationship between them, and what about the other women in the book?
Okay, well, Nina becomes, what happens is that Rebecca inherits the house and Nina from relatives of a relative, which is how she's kind of also able to be in Salerno. And Rebecca is a mother figure. She's very, in addition to preparing wonderful food and taking care of things, she also takes the place of Rebecca's ancient mother. Now in Ivanhoe, again, it was just Rebecca and her father, Isaac. So from there, I posit that mom was gone early in life. And there's a gap there. The other women also say, hey, you know what? You never had a mother. You never had a sister. You need to get this kind of advice and caring that you don't get even from just having a devoted father take care of you. So the other women definitely play an important role in the book. But also there's, one of the offstage women who plays an important role was Eleanor of Aquitaine. Going back to Ivanhoe, and the setup for what happens for Rebecca. Ivanhoe had followed Richard the Lionheart to the Crusades, and they were coming back, and this really happened in history. Richard was kidnapped by the Hohenstaufens and held prisoner. Now, in his absence, his worthless, horrible brother, King John, who later ended up having to sign the Magna Carta, had taken the role of king and also refused to pay the ransom for his brother. Okay. Their mother, Eleanor of Aquitaine, was the one who intervened and had the ransom paid so that Richard was freed from this prison. Now, how this connects to my book is that the Hohenstaufens and with the Holy Roman Emperor took the funds and conquered the Kingdom of Sicily, which is where Salerno was. So, and what happened with that is that we were talking about the very tolerant medical school that Rebecca chose to go to. When the Hohenstaufens came in and conquered the ruling Normans, the whole atmosphere of tolerance began to go downhill and deteriorate. So, there's a real overlap between that history and then what happens in the book.
From a historical perspective, I mean, it has to be said that Jewish people get such a bad rap, don't they? I mean, whenever we see them historically, like you said, you mentioned that they're almost always the villains, or I mean, in Ivanhoe, Rebecca's father, he's a moneylender. It's like, how many times Jewish people, seen as moneylenders in everything from Ivanhoe to Shakespeare and everything kind of in between. And it's like, I mean, what's with that? I mean, I've never been able to kind of understand it myself, and but it's like it just seems to be this thing that's been there for forever almost, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I mean, how does your story kind of fit in with that, do you think?
Well, often the situation was that working with money was the only kind of work that was available for Jews in different areas. And they were closed out of other professions and guilds. And this is, again, why the medical school was tempting. And, when you were financing or collecting taxes or other jobs like this could tend to make you not be so popular. But and then, go in with this. So often, actually, the Jews ended up financing the historical events that went against them. And that harmed them, the Crusades and so on, and where whole towns were massacred. So it's part of that complexity. But the money lending was often closed to Christians, or they couldn't charge interest, and so on. So this is where the Jews did the work they could.
Interesting.
And that's simplifying something that's really pretty complex.
Sure, yeah.
So, not sure if you can read this.
Yes, we'll read it. We'll read it out. Thank you so much for this question, JD. He's asking, not sure if you covered this, but how long was the research? And did you outline everything methodically or as you went?
So this is such a very good question. And I gather that the other writers here are also pantsers.
Yeah.
As opposed to plotters. Yeah, I'm a pantser too. So saying, if anything I do is methodical.
Discovery writer, I think, is the politically correct way to say it now. Discovery writer, yes.
Yeah, is wishful thinking. Kind of, you have a rough roadmap that you have as to where you want to start and maybe end, and hope, and start going there. So, it was just a very, very long process, but calling it methodical would be complimentary. You're a hybrid. I wish I could be. I wish I could be more of a plotter, because I understand plotters do fewer drafts.
I don't know about that. I'm a pantser, and I don't do a lot of drafts. I do one draft and I just edit, and I'm good to go. But I edit as I go, and I edit after I go. I think as a fantasy author, because I have a long series, that I start as a pantser. All my books are pantsered beginnings, but there's a lot of plotting that goes on as the books go on, because I have to start documenting my history. So as much as you research the history of, Jewish history and everything else that you went into Salerno and Rebecca, I have to research my own history, which seems kind of silly, but it's true. I have to know exactly what's happened, gone before. So I have these extensive Excel spreadsheets. So I'm kind of a hybrid now as well, just because of the way my pantsing career has gone on. So 14 books into it, there's no way I can remember what happened in book one.
Oh yeah, especially if you're working on a series. I consider literally my first draft, I call it the vomit method. You just kind of not to dignify that, as calling it a draft, and a lot of editing, a lot of revision.
A lot of editing for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So would you say, I know that JD was asking a little bit about, how long was the research? Would you say that you did a ton of research first, or did you sort of do your vomit draft, realize what you had to research, and kind of did the majority after?
I think the original research and the original inspiration was finding out about Salerno. And, then as you go along, you say, okay, I need some, work on this, and I need to know some more about this. Yeah. So, So no, the research was not done initially. I did it as I went along.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's hard to know everything you got to know. Yeah.
Oh yeah. And all of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, about this or about that. And there's missing stuff. Part of what the year that the book takes place is 1205, which was right after the death of Maimonides, who is a very important figure in Jewish history, was a great scientist and also a great writer about a lot of very, very prolific. And so, finding out more about that, and that was one aspect of it.
Yeah. I think, Richard, you wanted to say something else.
No, you know what? I've totally lost it, but I think you've answered the question anyway as you went on. But that happens all the time. It's gone.
I know, right?
Yeah. Oh, you know what? But what I did want to talk about is I want to hear about your massive book collection.
About
your massive book collection.
Oh.
I have a great big library. I've got finally old enough to have my own room dedicated library, and I actually built a secret library. So you actually move one of the panels, and you actually walk into where I keep all my manuscripts. But I love hearing about other people's libraries.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of books, and I'm happy that I'm not limited to one language, because that means I can have books in more than one language, and having them. Yeah, I have too many books.
No.
Never.
It's impossible. It's impossible.
I guess I have not enough space.
Yeah, there is space could be an issue for sure. It's funny. I do these book shows, and people say, "Oh, I like to get a book, but I have too many books already." I said, "No, you don't. Buy a book. You don't have enough yet."
Yeah.
So, Esther, you mentioned languages just then, and it's like I noticed on your website it mentions that you're an expert linguist. So I was kind of like curious. It's like, have you done any translation of like your own book?
No, I haven't. And no, for one thing, if you're going to translate, as far as I'm concerned, you should be translating into your native language, not from it. It's translation is so difficult to get right, and you really have to be current in the language that you're translating into, which is pretty much impossible if you're not living in that country and using that language. So no, beyond a very primitive level, I wouldn't be doing that. But in my book, I had Raphael, who is the sort of love interest. He loves her, but she doesn't love him, at least. Working as a translator and trying to keep the Hebrew language alive, which actually was a real thing. And so what Raphael does is that he takes the current knowledge, such as what is being created by the Arabs and the Jews in medicine and so on, and translates it into Hebrew in an effort to keep the Hebrew language contemporary and current with what was going on then. And this really was something that people were doing. So, the idea is that Hebrew was dead for all those centuries, but actually it wasn't as dead as people would assume. So it wasn't just brought to life all of a sudden when people started going to Israel, to Palestine. But in the book also, what happens is Raphael and Rebecca get caught up in trying to solve a murder. And a rabbi who comes from Maimonides' court in Egypt is accused of murdering a crusader, which is not something that goes over big for the Jewish community. And so Rebecca and Raphael become very involved in pursuing justice. The rabbi is not a popular figure, but they don't want him to be executed for a crime he didn't commit. This is all part of really how it actually got pretty complicated. We tend to look back at medieval and think, well, things were simple. They weren't.
Right. That's true.
And this all had to do then with going along with the deterioration of the tolerance in Salerno and the Kingdom of Sicily.
Mm. We have another question from JD, and he says, how many languages do you read and write?
You read and write. Okay. That's an interesting question. My first language was Yiddish, which is written in Hebrew characters. I abandoned Yiddish when I learned English at age 5. So very late, I've been trying to pick it up. My parents always spoke Yiddish to me, and I always responded in English in kind of typical immigrant families. The language that I am theoretically most fluent in, other than English, is French, because I have my master's degree. And so that's considered, in theory, that you're fluent. Though I'm feeling very rusty because I haven't used it, although I'm doing Wordle now in French.
Oh, cool.
And I'm also doing Wordle in Spanish, which I've studied a lot less, but I do better in the Spanish than in the French. My parents spoke Polish as the secret language in our family. So in an attempt to understand that, I studied Russian in college. So that's a different alphabet. And I learned that as a non-native speaker for Polish, I didn't understand much of it from the Russian. But now I'm studying Polish on Duolingo and finding some of the Russian helps.
Ah, okay.
And I also studied a little bit of Italian, which is absolutely gorgeous. Beautiful, beautiful language. I wish I had studied more younger.
And then maybe you could read some of the older documents, antique.
Yeah.
Documents.
Yeah. I mean, Latin too. I mean, gorgeous, gorgeous sounding language.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, I studied Latin in grade 10, so I don't know a lot about it, but I actually have a couple characters named after some Latin character people that you read in your first reader. You know, Loquax and Fellis and Bragans, they were Latin names that made it into my very first book, which I thought was kind of cool. But
yes.
So JD's asking first book that really left a mark on you. That's always an interesting
This
question.
is an interesting question too. The first book that I recall, it was a library book, and it was called Heroes and Heroines for Boys and Girls, and it had a gray cover. And the character I remember from that is Joan of Arc, who totally just captured my imagination. So to the point that I majored in French.
So how old were you when you read that book?
7.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
And Joan of Arc just, I mean, I'm still fascinated by Joan of Arc, and I'm way past 7. So yeah, that was absolutely the first book that I recall that really just impressed me so much. I lived in the Bronx at that point when I was little, and I remember my mother would give me a dime, and I would go to the corner store, and they had all these comic books, you know, and I would spend hours. I don't know how the owner didn't throw me out of the store, you know, trying to choose which comic book, you know, to buy for my dime. Another book I just want to mention as a French major, the most perfect novel that I ever read was Les Liaisons Dangereuses by Laclos from the 18th century. So I'm just going to give him a plug.
I'm sure he appreciates it.
I'm sure. Yeah, this is, you know, talk about a one-hit wonder, but what a perfect, you know, technically just the most perfect book.
Yeah. What is that in English?
Dangerous Liaisons.
Dangerous Liaison.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Which has, you know, spawned plays and movies and all kinds of things. Really, it's an epistolary novel. It's all written in letters, and he just gets it right. So anyway, if someone's looking for a good book to read.
Yeah, absolutely. Really cool. Do we have time for one more question?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I think there was another one about Joan of Arc that I saw.
Oh no, JD was just saying that it's a fascinating subject, but he also mentioned something a little bit earlier. He said look at clothes and tell me how simple the Middle Ages.
Yeah, so the Middle Ages, and it's funny too, because actually when the medical school started, 802 is often considered the Dark Ages. So some people just figure medieval last 500 to 1500 in the Common Era. Other people say, well, 500 approximately to 1000 was the Dark Ages. And, calling something the Dark Ages makes it really sound simple and primitive and all that. And none of it was.
Yeah, it's very interesting from a scientific point of view, because, the Dark Ages is kind of like considered this kind of like time period where like really nothing happened, sort of scientific and all of this kind of stuff. There was no progress. But in actual fact, it was the Dark Ages because the records weren't kept. And that's what makes it kind of like dark, because it's not known what was happening. But yeah, it's kind of like strange how these words get conjured up, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, having all these monks, hand copying everything, and the records like that. But as I said, the medical school started in 802, which is really, it's considered 9th century, but you could almost push it 8th century. And you had Charlemagne becoming the Holy Roman Emperor in 800, and starting that whole tradition that lasted until I think was 1811, was the last Habsburg, who then gave it up. So it was, we're talking 1,000-year tradition. It all started then. So Francis II, who became Francis I, was the last Habsburg Holy Roman Emperor. Charlemagne was the first. And, just contextualizing when that medical school began.
It amazes me that, like you were saying before, about what was available and what they actually had during different time periods, because my time period is the Victorian era, and even then I'm still surprised sometimes by the things it turns out that they had available, things that you just don't think that they did. It's weird. Sometimes picture it differently.
Yeah, they evidently had enough transmission of the ancient Greek medical stuff that started the medicine, but then you had all the Muslim conquests around the Mediterranean and their medical work, and the Jews who worked with them. So you had an amalgam of the old and the new, coming together and pushing ahead and making something new, and then of course eventually leading to the Renaissance and all that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
We could talk about history all the time, for hours and hours and hours. It's so interesting, and even through the Dark Ages, there were things to talk about. But I just wanted to say thank you for coming on our show today, and we really appreciate having you here. So, what's next for Esther? Are you doing something? Are you writing another book? Are you hooked now that you've got the one story anthology?
Well, it's funny because there are a few different directions to go in. I mean, Rebecca Gratz is a fascinating character. There are also, I've discovered there are so many lost characters. There's, I don't know if you all know that last February, a statue of a woman named Licoricia was unveiled in Winchester, England. And she was a Jewish financier from 13th century who lived in Winchester. Was married twice, and among other things, she helped fund the Westminster Abbey. And King Henry III, who with whom she worked in finance and so on, got involved in a Jewish religious court that was necessary for a Jewish divorce so that she could marry the second husband she wanted to marry.
Oh, I like that.
And if someone said, wow, was there ever a English king who intervened in a Jewish divorce court? You say, really? It sounds like fiction. It wasn't. So I'd love to uncover some of these stories that are lost, and bring them out because they're fascinating.
Definitely.
You and Christy need to work together here. You guys can probably. That's what Christy does. Christy does that as well. She finds all these unheralded characters in history and brings them to life. And their stories are so interesting. You wonder why we've never heard about them before.
It's one of my favorite things is discovering these forgotten people who were a really big deal in their time and just dropped off after that. Nobody's ever heard of them again. I love.
Yeah, well, they uncovered enough of this story to put up this statue. In Winchester, England, and wow, so you do wonder whose story have we heard, and how do we find them? So I'm choosing amongst these different projects.
And
it's exciting.
Before we let you go, where can we find your books?
My books are available in any bookstore, any brick and mortar bookstore, and on all the different online sources.
So you're not exclusive to Amazon. You're on Apple and all those other places too. Okay, awesome.
It's all those places, and you can order them in bookstores in the U.S. and in England.
Oh, that's awesome.
And, I was in England in October, and I went into the bookstore and I ordered my book, and it was there the next day. And I said, "Wow,
wow, that's cool."
That's cool.
Yeah, it's so neat how fast we can get stuff now.
Yeah.
I was doing a book show, and I ran out of my first in series in one of my series, and great, I got 2 days to get it, and so I figured I'm going to go on Amazon. I ordered it on Amazon. It was there the next day. So it had to go to some kind of printer. They had to actually print it, get it to Amazon, and then send it to me. And I had it the next day in my hands. I go, holy cow, it was crazy. The price wasn't cheap, but at least I had them for the show. So. Yeah. So anyway, thank you for coming on, Esther. We appreciate you sharing your story. It sounds very interesting, and I love historical history. Historical history. Yeah, I'll be okay. I think I'm still recovering from New Year's.
Thank you, Esther.
Thanks, Esther.
So next week's guest is young adult science fiction author George Sirois. George is the author of the international best-selling young adult science fiction novel Excelsior. So that kind of goes along with our line there. So would that be in the Dark Ages Excelsior? If theoretically it was around. He has served as president of the Missouri Writers Guild and is the host of 2 podcasts. George is also an audiobook narrator. So it'll be interesting speaking to George next week. So for Christy, Esther, Dave, and myself, we wish everyone a safe and happy week ahead. Until we meet again, take good care.
Good night.